She was always overlooked. But today things would change. Isabella Montgomery stood at the grand entrance of Hawthorne Manor, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent years running from the girl she once was, plain, invisible, forgotten. But now, as she entered the ballroom, she was no longer the girl anyone ignored. Her transformation was undeniable. She moved with grace, her eyes sharp, her posture strong. The murmurs began immediately, whispers that she was no longer the same. The Duke of Hawthorne, once too busy with his own heartbreak to see her, turned as the room went silent. His eyes locked onto hers, and the weight of 1,000 unspoken words hung in the air. He couldn't look away. He had once dismissed her, never seeing the strength in her, the fire that had been waiting to blaze. Now, she stood before him, a woman he couldn't forget. Isabella felt the weight of his gaze, the way it made her pulse quicken. But she didn't flinch. She had come here for herself, to prove to herself that she was more than what they had all believed her to be. Her past no longer had a hold on her. But as the Duke stepped toward her, a part of her wondered if he saw the woman she had become or still saw the girl he had abandoned. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of years of regret. Isabella, her name fell from his lips like an apology, though he had never said one before. She looked at him, seeing the man he had become, one who, despite his cold exterior, was human. "You've changed," he whispered, almost as if he couldn't believe it. "I had to," she replied softly, her voice strong, but there was a hint of vulnerability. For years, she had hidden her true self, pretending to be someone she wasn't. But now, she was free of those chains. "And I'm not the only one who has," she added, her gaze piercing. Alexander's eyes softened. He hadn't expected this. He had seen her as nothing more than a simple girl, someone beneath his notice. But now, she was something more. And for the first time in years, he realized just how wrong he had been. He took a step closer, but the distance between them still felt like miles. Isabella didn't move. She was done waiting for his approval. She had created her own destiny, one that didn't depend on the Duke's recognition. But as their eyes locked, the truth was undeniable. There was a connection here, one that neither of them could ignore. The room buzzed around them, but for Isabella and Alexander, the world had stopped. He wanted to say something, to explain himself, but words felt inadequate. "I never thought you'd return," he finally murmured. "But now that you have, I realize I've missed you more than I ever knew." Isabella's heart fluttered, but she didn't let herself be swept away by the emotions he stirred. She was no longer the girl he had forgotten. She was Isabella Montgomery, a woman of strength and grace, and she wasn't about to let him define her anymore. Isabella stood in the grand hallway, the sounds of the bustling ballroom barely reaching her ears. She couldn't escape the weight of Duke Alexander's gaze. It was different this time, not filled with indifference, but something more, regret, longing, and perhaps a recognition of the woman she had become. The years had been kind to her, and as much as she wanted to brush off his attention, a part of her longed to know if he truly saw her now, or if she was just a fleeting shadow of the past. She had spent so long pretending not to care, but now, with him standing so close, it was impossible to ignore the stirring in her chest. "Isabella," his voice broke through her thoughts, warm yet tentative. She turned, meeting his eyes with a cool resolve. "What is it you want from me now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding her. Alexander hesitated, searching her face, his expression torn between guilt and something deeper. "I've made many mistakes," he finally said, his words low but sincere. "Mistakes I can never undo, but I need you to know," he trailed off, his hand reaching out but stopping short of touching her. Isabella stood her ground, the years of silence between them hanging like a heavy curtain. "You don't need to explain," she replied, her voice firm, yet a soft vulnerability leaked through. "You were never the man I thought you were, and I was never the girl you wanted." Alexander flinched at her words, as if they had struck him harder than any accusation. "I never wanted to hurt you, Isabella. I was blind to what was right in front of me. But now, seeing you, I realize how much I've lost." His eyes softened, a depth of regret in his gaze. Isabella took a slow breath. Her heart ached with the pull of his words, but she didn't allow herself to soften. Not yet. Not until he proved he truly saw her. "You never really saw me, Alexander," she said quietly. I was just a passing face, someone to be forgotten. And now, years later, you want redemption. But I'm not the girl you once knew. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or the realization of his own failings. I'm not asking for redemption, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm asking for a chance to show you who I can be, to prove that I've changed. Isabella stepped back slightly, her heart racing as she fought to keep her emotions in check. Actions speak louder than words, she said, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of years of hurt. And you will have to show me you're more than the man who dismissed me. Alexander's face hardened with determination. Then let me show you, he said, his voice resolute. Let me prove that I'm not the man I was. You deserve better than that, Isabella. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve. His words hung in the air, suspended between them, full of possibility, yet full of uncertainty. Isabella looked at him, her gaze piercing, assessing. Could he truly change? Could she let herself believe in him again? The room around them buzzed with energy, but for Isabella and Alexander, time seemed to stand still. She was no longer the girl who had been cast aside, and he was no longer the Duke who had once turned his back on her. There was a new tension between them now, one filled with the promise of something deeper, something real. But was it enough? Isabella didn't know. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to trust him again. Isabella had spent the last few days at Hawthorne Manor, her mind constantly pulled in two directions. Duke Alexander's words echoed in her mind. Let me prove that I'm not the man I was. But what if he was still the same man who had turned his back on her so many years ago? The thought lingered, but there was also something else, something she had not felt in years, hope. Hope that perhaps she wasn't as forgotten as she once believed. The large windows of the manor offered a view of the sprawling gardens below. Isabella stood there, looking out, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. She had spent years rebuilding herself, learning to stand on her own. She could not afford to let anyone, even Duke Alexander, tear down what she had built. The sound of footsteps approaching broke her thoughts. She turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his face unreadable but his eyes soft. May I speak with you? He asked. She nodded, her heart racing. As he stepped closer, the air between them seemed charged, as if the years of distance were finally coming to a head. I know I have no right to ask this of you, he began, his voice low. But I need you to know that I am not the same man I was when you left. I've spent these years trying to forget you, but I can't. And now that you're here, I realize I don't want to forget you. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. He was right. He had no right to ask anything of her, but his words, his sincerity, made it impossible to stay indifferent. I don't know if I can forgive you, she replied, her voice steady but full of uncertainty. I can't erase what you did to me, but I can't ignore what's in front of me now, either. Alexander took a deep breath, stepping closer, but this time, there was no pressure, no urgency, just a quiet, desperate hope. I don't ask for forgiveness, Isabella. I just ask for the chance to show you who I am now, to show you that I'm not that man. I want to prove to you that I can be the man you deserve. Isabella felt a wave of emotion crash over her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself trust him again. But could she? And if I say no? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes darkened, but there was no anger there, only a deep sorrow. Then I will respect your decision. But I will never stop trying to prove myself to you. She stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. She wanted to say yes, to take his hand and let him back into her life. But part of her still feared the man he had once been, the man who had abandoned her without a second thought. I need time, she finally said, her voice firm but filled with a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. I need time to figure out who I am in all of this. Alexander nodded, his expression softening. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting for you. But just know this, I'll never stop trying. Isabella didn't respond. She couldn't. Instead, she turned back to the window, staring out at the garden once more. She didn't know what the future held, or if she would ever be able to trust Alexander again. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if there was still a chance for them, or if the past would always stand between them like an insurmountable wall. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Isabella found herself torn between the life she had built for herself and the man who now stood before her, asking for a second chance. She had never imagined that Alexander, the man who had dismissed her so easily years ago, would return, transformed, offering more than words could express. She watched him from afar, noticing how his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. His gaze was different now, filled with a longing that made her chest tighten. Yet, despite his sincerity, a wall remained between them, one she couldn't quite bring herself to break down. She had known the pain of being dismissed before, and she wasn't sure she could risk feeling it again. Alexander, for his part, was patient. He never pushed, never tried to rush her into forgiveness. Instead, he made small gestures, a kind word, a thoughtful action, a quiet presence. He spent his days helping around the manor, working alongside the staff, showing a humility she had never seen in him before. He was a different man, but was it enough? One evening, as Isabella sat by the fire in the drawing room, Alexander entered quietly, his eyes meeting hers. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Isabella, I know I cannot erase the past," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I hope I can make up for it, in whatever way you will allow." Isabella didn't answer right away. She had thought about his words for days, turning them over in her mind. Could she let go of the hurt, the years of silence and neglect? Could she believe that he had truly changed? She finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You've shown me kindness, Alexander. More than I ever expected. But trust is something I cannot give away so easily." He nodded, his expression a mixture of understanding and regret. "I know, and I would never ask you to give it to me all at once. I will prove myself, if you will allow me the chance." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Isabella felt the weight of their shared history between them. The man she had once known was standing before her, but the man he had become was someone she wasn't sure she could trust. Yet, in his eyes, she saw something, a depth, a sincerity, that made her question her own resolve. She had built a life without him, a life that had given her strength. But now, as she looked at him, she wondered if there was room for him in it. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't expect you to forgive me today, or tomorrow," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I will spend every day showing you that I am worthy of your trust, of your heart." Isabella's heart fluttered at his words, but she held her ground. She wasn't ready to give in, not yet. But something had shifted inside her. She could feel it, deep within her. A possibility, a glimmer of hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed to begin again. Days passed in a quiet rhythm, with Isabella remaining cautious of Alexander's every move. He had proven himself time and time again, showing kindness, respect, and patience, but she couldn't shake the fear that still lingered in her heart. The past had a way of resurfacing, reminding her of all the hurt she had endured, and no matter how much Alexander changed, it was difficult for her to let go of that pain. Yet, as the days went on, Isabella began to see him in a different light. He was no longer the arrogant duke who had once dismissed her. He had become someone more, someone who cared. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden light over the manor, Isabella found herself in the garden, her thoughts drifting. She had come to appreciate the stillness of the place, the way the flowers swayed in the gentle breeze, offering her a sense of peace. It was there, standing among the roses, that Alexander found her. He had been searching for her, hoping to speak to her once more. As he approached, Isabella felt her heart quicken, but she didn't turn to face him. She had spent so much time avoiding the truth of her feelings, but now, standing in the garden, it was harder to ignore. "Isabella," he called softly, his voice gentle. She didn't reply immediately, her fingers brushing against the petals of the flowers. Alexander stood a few feet away, waiting. He didn't push. He never did. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "I know you are trying, Alexander, but I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I don't know if I can trust you again." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Alexander took a deep breath, stepping closer, but keeping his distance. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I don't expect you to trust me right away. But what I can offer you is my truth, and my promise that I will be here, no matter what." Isabella's heart fluttered at his words, but she still couldn't bring herself to look at him. I've spent so long trying to forget you, trying to erase everything, she continued. But it's impossible, Alexander. You were a part of me, even when I didn't want you to be. Her voice cracked slightly, the emotion breaking through the calm facade she had carefully built. Alexander's heart ached as he listened to her. He had never understood the depth of her pain until now. He wanted to reach out to her, to pull her close and promise that everything would be all right. But he knew that wasn't enough. He couldn't fix everything with just his words. I never wanted to hurt you, Isabella, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was blind, and I made mistakes. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for them. You don't have to forgive me now, or even ever. But if you ever decide you want me in your life, I'll be here. Isabella finally turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of vulnerability and strength. She had wanted to push him away, to keep her heart safe, but something in his words, in his presence, made it impossible. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if forgiveness was possible. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Alexander stepped closer, a slow but deliberate movement, and Isabella didn't step back. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to run. I don't know what will happen between us, Alexander, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But maybe, just maybe, we can find our way back to each other. He reached out then, his hand trembling slightly as he gently touched her arm. That's all I'm asking for. They stood there, in the quiet garden, surrounded by the fading light of the day. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real, and that was enough for now. Isabella wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could start again. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of distance and quiet moments of understanding. Isabella found herself growing more comfortable with Alexander's presence, though the walls around her heart remained solid. She could see the changes in him, the way he listened more intently, the way he worked alongside the staff, the way he cared for the estate with a level of humility she had never seen before. It was clear that he wasn't the same man who had once dismissed her so easily. But could she trust that change? She wasn't sure yet. Alexander, for his part, gave her space, allowing her the time she needed to figure out where they stood. He never pressured her, never demanded her forgiveness. But every now and then, he would catch her gaze with a quiet, pleading look, as if asking for a chance, just one chance, to prove that he could be the man she deserved. It was a slow process, one she didn't know how to navigate. She had never been good at trusting others, and the pain of the past had left scars that ran deep. But Alexander's patience was wearing down the walls she had built around herself. One morning, as Isabella was walking through the gardens, lost in her thoughts, she heard a familiar voice. Isabella, wait. She turned, finding Alexander standing just a few feet away, his eyes searching hers. I know I've been distant lately, he said, his voice soft but steady. But I want to be clear with you. I am not asking for anything from you. I only want you to know that I will be here, no matter what. Isabella took a step closer, her heart racing. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly, to be so vulnerable. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, and it made something stir deep inside her. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice quiet, but resolute. About starting over. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Alexander. But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something for you. Alexander's breath caught, his eyes lighting up with a hope that made Isabella's heart ache. What are you saying? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella hesitated, unsure of what to say next, but then she spoke, the words coming from a place she hadn't expected. I'm saying that I'm willing to try. I don't know if it will work, but I'm willing to see where this goes. There was a long silence between them, filled with the weight of her words. Alexander stood frozen, his heart racing. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. For so long, he had feared that this moment would never come, that he would never have the chance to make things right. But here she was, offering him a chance. Thank you, he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. Thank you for giving me this chance. Isabella smiled, though it was tentative, uncertain. She still had doubts, still had fears, but for the first time in a long while she felt like she was not alone. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was willing to take the first step. And for now, that was enough. Alexander took a step closer, his hand reaching out to her, but this time, she didn't pull away. She allowed him to hold her hand, the simple gesture speaking volumes more than words ever could. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the happily ever after she had once dreamed of, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way to something beautiful. The days that followed were a mix of quiet moments and uncertain glances. Isabella and Alexander began to find a rhythm, a balance that was neither too fast nor too slow, just enough to allow them to rebuild the connection that had once been lost. They spent time together in the gardens, walking side by side, each of them unsure of what to say, but both finding comfort in the other's presence. Alexander was always patient with her, never pushing, always allowing her to take the lead. It was a new kind of relationship for both of them, one built on trust that had to be earned, not assumed. But despite the tenderness in his actions, Isabella still kept a part of herself locked away. She was scared that if she opened her heart fully again, she would be hurt. Scared that this new Alexander, the man who had changed, might be just a fleeting illusion. And so, she held back, not allowing herself to fall completely, even though every moment with him made it harder to resist. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the drawing room, the warmth of the flames flickering against the walls, Alexander turned to her, his expression serious. "Isabella," he began, his voice low, "I know I've asked a lot of you. I know you're not ready to trust me completely, and I understand that. But I need you to know something." She turned to face him, her heart racing. She had never seen him so vulnerable before, and it made something stir within her. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I've never stopped loving you," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Even when I didn't know how to love you properly, even when I pushed you away, I've always loved you. And I'll keep loving you, no matter what happens." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, to tell him that she had never stopped loving him either, but the words felt stuck, trapped inside her. She had been so guarded for so long that it was hard to open herself up, even now. Instead, she simply looked at him, her gaze soft but uncertain. Alexander reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, but it felt like everything. Isabella didn't pull away. She let him hold her hand, feeling the warmth of his touch. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. "I just want you to know that I'll be here, whenever you're ready." His words wrapped around her like a safety net, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with him. She didn't know when she would be ready, or what that would look like, but for now, in this moment, she was willing to try. As they sat in silence, the fire crackling in the background, Isabella realized that maybe it wasn't about rushing to forgiveness or healing. Maybe it was about taking small steps, one at a time, and trusting that the journey would lead them somewhere worth going. Alexander had shown her that he was willing to wait. Now, it was her turn to show him that she could take the leap. And with that, she allowed herself to lean into him, just a little more, trusting that perhaps they could find their way back to each other, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet understanding between Isabella and Alexander began to deepen. They spent more time together, their conversations flowing with ease, yet still, there was a tension that lingered, an unspoken question that neither of them dared to address fully. Isabella had started to trust him, but only a small part of her. She could see the changes in him, the way he treated the staff with kindness, the way he sought her opinion on matters of the estate, the way he respected her space. But still, a small voice inside her whispered doubts. Could he truly be the man he claimed to be, or was this just another facade? Alexander, for his part, continued to prove himself. He was patient, never rushing her, never demanding more than she was willing to give. And yet, the deeper they went, the more his feelings for her grew. He had always known that he cared for her, but seeing her in this new light, seeing the strength she had built for herself, made him admire her more than he had ever imagined. One evening, as the sun set over the sprawling gardens, Alexander found Isabella walking alone by the edge of the pond, the golden light casting a soft glow on her face. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding with the weight of everything he had been holding inside. "Isabella," he called gently. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something different now, a subtle shift in the air between them, a quiet understanding that things were changing, whether they were ready for it or not. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "About us, about where we're going." Isabella held his gaze, her heart racing. She had felt the shift too. She had known, deep down, that she couldn't keep holding back forever. "I don't want to rush anything, Alexander," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something for you. I know it's not perfect, and I know I'm not ready to throw myself completely into it, but I need to be honest with you." Alexander's heart soared at her words, though he kept his expression calm. "You don't have to be ready right now," he said, taking a step closer. "I've spent my life rushing through things, pushing for control, for results. But with you, I want to take things slow. I want to build something real, something that's not rushed or forced." Isabella's chest tightened, and for the first time, she realized how much she had been holding back. "I'm scared, Alexander," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Scared that if I let go, I'll lose myself again." Alexander reached out then, his hand gently brushing hers. "You don't have to lose yourself, Isabella," he said softly. "I want you to be you. I want to be here, beside you, supporting you, in whatever way you need." The simple honesty of his words hit her like a wave. She had spent so long guarding herself, never fully allowing anyone in, but now, standing before him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take the next step. "I don't know where this is going," she said, her voice steady but vulnerable. "But I'm willing to try. For you. For us." Alexander's face softened, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's all I'm asking for," he whispered. They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them comfortable now, filled with the quiet promise of something new, something real. Isabella didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to take the leap. With Alexander by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could build something together, something worth fighting for. The days grew longer, and with each passing moment, Isabella felt herself becoming more entwined in the life that she and Alexander were building together. The trust that had once seemed so distant, so impossible, now felt like a steady thread between them, binding them in ways that neither of them had anticipated. Yet, even as they moved forward, there was still a quiet tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that they both had more to confront before they could fully embrace their future. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, the sun sinking low behind the hills, Isabella turned to Alexander, her heart heavy with thoughts she had kept hidden. "Alexander," she began, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I know we've been moving forward, but I need to be honest with you about something. Something I've been carrying with me for a long time." Alexander looked at her, his expression calm, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "What is it, Isabella?" he asked, his voice steady, offering her the space she needed. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions that had risen inside her. "I've spent so much of my life protecting myself," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I've built walls around my heart because I was afraid of being hurt again. But what if I'm still afraid, even now? What if I'm too broken to fully let go and trust in this?" The words hung in the air, and, for a moment, Alexander said nothing. He simply looked at her, his eyes softening as he understood the weight of what she was saying. "Isabella," he finally whispered, reaching out to gently take her hand. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to be perfect. I don't need you to be. All I need is for you to be here, with me, as you are." Isabella looked at him, her chest tightening at the sincerity in his voice. "But what if I can't give you everything you deserve? What if I'm not enough?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander squeezed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You are more than enough, Isabella. You always have been. And I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for a chance for us to build something real, something lasting. But that starts with trust, and trust, like love, has to grow." Isabella felt the tears threaten to spill from her eyes, but she fought them back. She had never allowed herself to be this vulnerable, to open up this much, and it terrified her. But in that moment, as she looked into Alexander's eyes, she knew something had shifted. "I'm willing to try," she said, her voice steady now, the walls around her heart beginning to crack. "I'm willing to take that chance. With you." A sense of peace settled over her, as though the weight of her fears had lifted, if only for a moment. Alexander smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes, and he leaned in to kiss her forehead gently. That's all I've ever wanted, Isabella. Just a chance. A chance to show you that I will always be here, always fighting for you, no matter what. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt the truth of his words. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the willingness to grow, to heal, and to trust. And with that, they both knew. The future was no longer uncertain. It was theirs to shape together. As the days passed, the bond between Isabella and Alexander grew stronger, though they still moved cautiously, each step forward carefully considered. The walls that had once seemed insurmountable were now slowly crumbling, piece by piece, revealing a deeper connection between them than either had anticipated. The manor, once a place of tension and uncertainty, had transformed into a home filled with quiet moments of understanding, shared laughter, and the occasional silence that spoke volumes. Yet, despite the growing closeness, Isabella couldn't shake the lingering doubts that sat heavy in her chest. She had come so far, allowing herself to trust again, but the fear that history might repeat itself still haunted her. What if, in the end, she was left with nothing but heartache once more? She had already lost so much, and the thought of opening herself fully to Alexander only to have it all slip away terrified her. But as the days turned into weeks, Alexander continued to prove himself. His patience never wavered, and his dedication to earning her trust was unwavering. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It was the small things, the way he held her hand when she needed comfort, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he respected her space when she needed time alone. He had become someone she could count on, and for the first time in a long time, she realized that she was beginning to believe in the possibility of a future with him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the garden, Alexander found Isabella sitting on the stone bench by the pond. The air was cool, the rustling of the trees the only sound that filled the space around them. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace she seemed to have found. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice carrying across the stillness. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a gentle smile. "I was hoping I could join you." She patted the space beside her, and without a word, Alexander sat down beside her. For a long moment, they simply sat together, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward, a reflection of how far they had come. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about everything, about us," she said, her eyes focused on the water in front of her. "And I've realized that I'm not as afraid anymore." Alexander turned to face her, his expression softening. "Afraid of what?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Afraid of losing myself again," she replied, her voice steady now. "Afraid of trusting someone, of allowing myself to feel completely. But I think I'm ready to trust you, Alexander. I'm ready to see where this can go." His heart swelled in his chest, and he reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. "You don't have to rush anything, Isabella. I'm not asking you to leap before you're ready. But knowing that you're willing to try, that means everything to me." She turned to him then, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but finding none. There was nothing left between them but honesty, and in that moment, she realized that she had nothing left to fear. "I'm willing to try," she said, her voice full of resolve. "I'm willing to see where this takes us, together." Alexander smiled, a warmth spreading through him at her words. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was a beginning, a chance to start again, to build something new. And that, for both of them, was enough. They sat together in silence once more, the cool evening air surrounding them, knowing that this was just the beginning of something beautiful. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, they were both ready to walk it, side by side. As the days went on, Isabella found herself growing more and more comfortable in Alexander's presence. The uncertainty that had clouded her heart for so long was slowly giving way to something new, something she had been too afraid to feel before. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the life they were building together could be something real. Alexander, too, felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. Every moment spent with Isabella was a reminder of the future they could create, but he never took it for granted. He knew her trust wasn't something he could rush. It had to be earned, piece by piece. The small, shared moments were what mattered most. One evening, they found themselves in the drawing room, the soft glow of the fire casting gentle shadows on the walls. Alexander watched as Isabella sat across from him, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her glass. There was a quiet calm between them now, a comfort in simply being near one another. Alexander knew this was a pivotal moment, a chance to move forward. But he didn't want to rush. He had learned that patience was key with Isabella. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. She looked up, meeting his gaze, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the fire. "Yes," she replied, her voice gentle, as if she, too, sensed the significance of the moment. "I've been thinking about everything we've shared," Alexander began, taking a deep breath. "And I just want you to know that no matter what, I'm here. With you. For you. In every way." Isabella's heart fluttered in her chest. She had heard those words before, from other men, from other promises, but this time, it felt different. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no doubt in his voice. He meant it. "I'm here too," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but full of sincerity. "I've spent so much of my life hiding parts of myself, protecting pieces of my heart," she continued, her gaze never leaving his. "But with you, I feel like I can finally let go. Not all at once, but in small ways. And that, for me, is enough." A wave of emotion swept over Alexander, and he stood slowly, crossing the room to where she sat. He didn't say a word as he extended his hand toward her. She hesitated for a moment, but then took it, feeling the warmth of his touch, grounding her. He helped her to her feet, their hands still clasped together. "I don't know what the future holds," Isabella said softly, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "But I'm ready to face it with you." Alexander smiled, his heart full. "That's all I need to hear," he whispered. They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other's gaze, each understanding that the journey ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, Isabella felt ready to take the next step. Together, Alexander gently pulled her closer, his hand resting on her cheek, his thumb brushing softly over her skin. The connection between them felt deeper than it had before, and in that moment, neither of them needed words. They had come so far, and though they knew the road ahead would not be without challenges, they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and for now, that was enough. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, steady comfort. Isabella and Alexander had found a rhythm, a way of being together that felt natural, though the world outside the walls of Hawthorne Manor remained as unpredictable as ever. Their conversations flowed easily, with laughter shared over dinner and moments of silence spent together in the gardens. The foundation of trust between them had grown stronger with each passing day, but there were still pieces of the past, lingering in the corners of Isabella's heart, that she hadn't yet fully faced. She was no longer afraid of what might happen between them, but the uncertainty of her own feelings still weighed on her. Alexander, however, never faltered. He gave her space when she needed it, but he was always there when she turned to him. He didn't rush her, never pushed for more than she was willing to give. And for the first time in years, Isabella felt something she had long forgotten: peace. One evening, as the sky outside darkened with the promise of rain, Alexander found Isabella sitting by the window in the study. The storm had begun, the soft tapping of rain against the glass creating a quiet rhythm that matched the stillness in the room. He watched her for a moment, taking in the way the candlelight flickered in her hair, the way her eyes were distant, lost in thought. "Isabella," he said gently, his voice low. She turned to him, her expression softening. "I'm here," he added, stepping closer. "If you need me." She smiled faintly, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know," she said, her voice soft, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. She hadn't realized how much she had grown to depend on him, how much she had let herself lean on his strength. But now, as she sat there, facing the quiet storm inside herself, she wasn't sure she was ready to open up completely. Alexander knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his gaze filled with concern. Isabella sighed, a long breath that seemed to carry all of her thoughts. I think I'm ready," she said quietly. "But I'm not sure what that means." She looked down at their joined hands, her fingers tracing the lines of his. I've been so afraid of trusting, of giving too much of myself to someone else. But now, with you, it feels different. I want to trust you, Alexander. I want to let go of the fear. But I don't know how. Alexander's heart swelled at her words, and he gently lifted her chin with his free hand, bringing her eyes back to his. You don't have to let go of anything, Isabella, he said softly. Trust doesn't happen all at once. It's not something that's given in one big leap. It's in the small moments, the ones where you know, deep down, that the person beside you will always be there, no matter what. Isabella nodded, her throat tight as she absorbed his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself believe that they could build something lasting, something that was just theirs. But she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow holding back, afraid of what would happen if she gave all of herself. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Scared that I'll lose myself again. Alexander's expression softened, and he leaned in, his forehead gently resting against hers. You won't lose yourself, Isabella. I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are. I love you for exactly who you are, right now, in this moment. And I will love you, no matter where the future takes us. The words hung between them, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the truth of his words, letting them wash over her like the rain outside. Maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the past. Maybe she could trust again. And maybe, together, they could create something beautiful, something real. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of peace. Isabella and Alexander had begun to move beyond the walls of the past, allowing themselves to create a life that was truly theirs. The manor, once a place of uncertainty and quiet tension, now felt like a home, a place where laughter echoed through the halls, and the weight of old regrets had begun to lift. Isabella had learned to trust again, piece by piece, and with each passing day, she felt her heart grow stronger, no longer weighed down by the fear that had once consumed her. She still carried scars from the past, but they no longer defined her. They were just parts of her story. Alexander, too, had changed. He had proven that he was a man capable of love and patience, willing to wait for Isabella to find her own way. He had never rushed her, never expected her to give more than she was ready for. And in doing so, he had earned her trust. One evening, as they walked through the gardens, hand in hand, Isabella stopped to look at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the landscape. She felt a deep sense of gratitude in that moment, for the journey they had shared and for the future that lay ahead. Do you ever wonder where this will take us? She asked softly, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. Alexander stopped beside her, his gaze following hers as they both looked out at the horizon. Every day, he replied, his voice filled with sincerity. But no matter where we go, I know that I want to go there with you. Isabella turned to face him, her heart swelling at the words. She had never imagined that she could have this, a love that was steady, patient, and real. A love that didn't demand perfection, but simply asked for the chance to grow. I used to be so afraid, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid that if I gave myself to someone else, I would lose who I was. But now, I see that being with you, it makes me more of who I am. It makes me stronger. Alexander gently cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with love and warmth. You're already stronger than you know, Isabella. You always have been. And I'll spend my life showing you just how much I see in you. Isabella smiled, her heart full. She had come a long way from the woman who had once been so broken, so afraid of trusting. And now, standing beside Alexander, she realized that she was no longer that woman. She was someone new, someone who could embrace the future with hope and with love. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady and sure. I'm ready to build something real with you. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he could protect her from everything that had hurt her in the past. And in that moment, as the stars began to twinkle above them, Isabella knew that this was just the beginning. The journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, but together, they would face whatever came their way. Side by side, they had built something beautiful, something that was worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella allowed herself to believe that the future they were creating could be everything they had ever dreamed of. Together, They were unstoppable.